Welcome. Tonight, we delve into the intricate and often unspoken complexities of the male psyche, exploring facets that, while deeply human, are frequently obscured by societal expectations and internal struggles. These are not merely observations, but rather disturbing psychological facts that illuminate the hidden battles men fight, silent and unseen. Prepare to confront uncomfortable truths, to gain a profound understanding of the pressures and vulnerabilities that shape the male experience, and perhaps to see the men in your life, and indeed yourself, with a new, more empathetic clarity. Our journey begins with a stark reality. Men avoid therapy because they fear judgment. This isn't a simple preference, but a deep-seated apprehension rooted in centuries of cultural conditioning that has defined masculinity through lenses of unwavering strength, stoicism, and self-sufficiency. From the earliest moments of childhood, boys are often subtly, or sometimes overtly, taught that expressing vulnerability is a sign of weakness. They absorb messages that real men don't cry, real men solve their own problems, and real men certainly don't need to talk about their feelings with a stranger. To admit to needing professional help, to sit across from a therapist and articulate one's innermost anxieties or sorrows, can feel like an admission of profound failure, a public declaration that one has fallen short of the impossible ideal of masculine invincibility. The fear isn't just about the therapist's judgment, though that can be a minor concern. It's overwhelmingly about the perceived judgment of society, of peers, of family, and most painfully, of themselves. The internal narrative can be brutal. If I go to therapy, what does that say about me? Am I broken? Am I not strong enough? Will others see me as less capable, less masculine, less worthy of respect? This fear is a powerful deterrent, creating an invisible barrier between men and the very support systems that could offer them solace and solutions. They might rationalize their avoidance, claiming they don't have time, that therapy is expensive, or that it just isn't for them. But beneath these surface excuses often lies the chilling dread of being exposed, of having their carefully constructed facade of resilience crumble under the weight of their own unspoken pain. This societal pressure to maintain an image of unwavering fortitude is a heavy burden, forcing men to internalize their struggles, to suppress their emotional turmoil, and to bear their burdens in isolation, all to avoid the imagined scorn or diminished perception that might accompany seeking help. The irony is tragic. The very act that could lead to healing is perceived as a threat to their identity, trapping them in a cycle of silence and suffering, perpetuating the very issues that therapy aims to address. This pervasive fear of judgment is a silent epidemic, preventing countless men from accessing the emotional and psychological support they desperately need, ultimately leading to exacerbated mental health challenges, strained relationships, and a profound sense of isolation, all because the perceived cost of vulnerability feels too high. This reluctance to engage with their inner world, fueled by the fear of judgment, leads directly to our second disturbing fact. Men struggle to identify emotions beyond anger, sadness, and attraction. While every human possesses a full spectrum of emotions, the cultural conditioning that teaches men to suppress vulnerability also severely limits their emotional vocabulary and recognition. Boys are often encouraged to express anger as a masculine emotion, a forceful assertion of control, while sadness might be allowed in very specific, often private contexts. Attraction, particularly in its physical manifestation, is also readily acknowledged, being tied to procreation and a certain primal drive. But beyond this narrow triumvirate, the landscape of male emotion often becomes a barren wasteland. Nuances like frustration, disappointment, apprehension, longing, jealousy, contentment, gratitude, shame, or even tender affection can become blurred, mislabeled, or simply ignored. A man might feel a complex cocktail of vulnerability, fear, and hurt, but because he lacks the language or the internal permission to acknowledge these feelings, they might manifest outwardly as irritation, withdrawal, or an inexplicable outburst of anger. He might genuinely not know what he's feeling, only that something is off or wrong. This emotional illiteracy isn't a deficiency in their capacity to feel, but rather a profound underdevelopment in their ability to identify, articulate, and process those feelings. It's akin to having a vast library of books, but only being able to read 3 titles. When asked how they feel, a man might resort to generic responses like fine, okay, or stressed, not because they are being deliberately evasive, but because they genuinely lack the precise terminology or the internal mapping to articulate the rich tapestry of their emotional experience. This inability to pinpoint specific emotions can be incredibly frustrating for them and for those around them. It hinders self-understanding, complicates communication in relationships, and makes it incredibly difficult to address the root causes of their distress. How can one solve a problem if one cannot even name it? This limited emotional lexicon is a direct consequence of the societal imperative for men to be strong and stoic, inadvertently stripping them of the tools necessary for emotional intelligence and self-awareness, leaving them adrift in a sea of undifferentiated feelings, often with anger as their only compass. In a world where identifying complex emotions is a struggle and vulnerability is seen as a weakness, men often develop coping mechanisms, leading us to our third disturbing fact: men use humor to hide insecurity. Laughter, in this context, becomes a shield, a social lubricant, and a powerful diversionary tactic. When faced with a moment that might expose a perceived flaw, a lack of knowledge, a fear of inadequacy, or a genuine emotional tender spot, a man might instinctively deploy a joke, a sarcastic remark, or self-deprecating humor. This isn't always malicious or even conscious. It's often a deeply ingrained response learned from years of navigating social situations where emotional honesty was punished or dismissed, and where quick wit was rewarded. The humor serves multiple purposes. It deflects attention away from the underlying insecurity. It creates a lighter atmosphere that discourages deeper probing, and it can even win approval or laughter from others, providing a temporary balm to the fragile ego. A man might make a joke about his physical appearance to preempt potential criticism, or crack wise about a mistake he's made to minimize its impact and signal that he's above it. He might use humor to avoid expressing genuine affection, to sidestep a serious conversation, or to mask his discomfort in emotionally charged situations. The self-deprecating joke, in particular, is a masterstroke of defensive humor, allowing him to control the narrative of his perceived flaws by being the first to point them out, thereby disarming others and making it harder for them to genuinely criticize him without seeming unkind. However, this constant reliance on humor, while socially effective in the short term, comes at a significant cost. It prevents authentic connection, builds walls instead of bridges, and ultimately leaves the underlying insecurities unaddressed and festering. The laughter, no matter how genuine it sounds, often rings hollow for the man himself, a constant reminder of the emotional burden he carries, hidden behind a carefully crafted comedic persona. It's a tragic performance, where the audience enjoys the show, unaware of the quiet desperation in the wings, a testament to the lengths men will go to protect their perceived masculine image from the perceived threat of vulnerability. This intricate dance of emotional concealment extends to even the most primal forms of expression, bringing us to our fourth disturbing fact: men suppress crying to fit social conditioning. From an early age, boys are bombarded with messages, both explicit and implicit, that equate tears with weakness. "Big boys don't cry," "suck it up," "be a man," are phrases that echo through their formative years, shaping an ironclad rule. Emotional pain must be endured silently, stoically. The act of crying, a natural human response to overwhelming emotion, whether it be sadness, frustration, grief, or even profound joy, becomes a forbidden expression for many men. It is seen as a betrayal of the masculine ideal, a public display of vulnerability that risks ridicule, judgment, or even a loss of status. The fear of being perceived as unmanly, soft, or incapable is a powerful motivator for this suppression. Consequently, men learn to choke back their tears, to clench their jaws, to redirect the surge of emotion into other more acceptable outlets, such as anger, physical exertion, or withdrawal. The internal battle can be immense, a physical struggle to contain a natural physiological response. They might feel the burning behind their eyes, the lump in their throat, the tremor in their voice, and yet, through sheer force of will, they push it down, deep inside. This suppression isn't just about avoiding a public display. It often extends to private moments as well, as the internalized conditioning becomes so powerful that they even deny themselves the catharsis of tears when alone. The long-term consequences are profound. Crying is a vital release mechanism, a way for the body and mind to process and purge intense emotions. When this mechanism is blocked, these emotions don't simply disappear. They accumulate, leading to increased stress, anxiety, depression, and a general feeling of emotional numbness or detachment. The suppressed tears become a heavy weight, contributing to a broader emotional constriction that impacts their ability to connect deeply with others, to fully experience joy, or to genuinely process grief. It's a tragic sacrifice, where the natural human need for emotional release is sacrificed on the altar of a rigid and ultimately damaging definition of masculinity, leaving men emotionally impoverished and perpetually carrying an unseen burden. The suppression of emotion, particularly vulnerability, has profound implications for interpersonal dynamics, leading us to our fifth disturbing fact. Men often stay silent in relationships to avoid conflict. This silence isn't necessarily born of malice or indifference. It's frequently a protective mechanism, a learned response to past experiences where expressing their true feelings or engaging in emotional dialogue led to arguments, misunderstandings, or accusations. For many men, conflict is perceived as a direct threat to the stability of the relationship, a situation to be diffused or avoided at all costs, even if it means sacrificing their own emotional needs or allowing festering issues to remain unaddressed. They might have grown up in environments where arguments were destructive, where emotional expression was met with anger or dismissal, or where they were implicitly taught that keeping the peace was paramount. Consequently, when a partner attempts to initiate a difficult conversation, or when a disagreement arises, a man might retreat into a stony silence, not because he doesn't care, but because he fears that any attempt to articulate his perspective, particularly if it involves his own feelings or perceived shortcomings, will only escalate the tension. He might believe that silence is the safest option, a way to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control, even if that silence is deeply frustrating and hurtful to his partner. He might also struggle to articulate his feelings effectively, as we've discussed, making the prospect of an emotional confrontation even more daunting. The fear of saying the wrong thing, of being misunderstood, or of inadvertently causing more pain can lead to a complete shutdown. This withdrawal can manifest as literal silence, or it can be a more subtle emotional disengagement, where he is present physically but absent emotionally. While he may perceive this silence as a strategy for maintaining harmony, it often has the opposite effect. It creates distance, fosters resentment, and prevents the genuine resolution of issues. His partner may interpret his silence as a lack of care, an unwillingness to engage, or even a form of passive aggression, leading to a vicious cycle of frustration and emotional isolation. The desire to avoid immediate conflict, therefore, inadvertently sows the seeds for deeper, more entrenched problems, as unspoken grievances and unmet emotional needs accumulate, silently eroding the foundation of the relationship. This pattern of emotional disengagement and the struggle to articulate deeper feelings often intertwines with a fundamental misunderstanding of relational needs, bringing us to our sixth disturbing fact: men confuse being needed with being loved. For many men, their sense of self-worth and their perceived value in a relationship are deeply tied to their ability to provide, protect, and solve problems. This is often an ingrained aspect of their masculine identity, shaped by societal narratives that cast men as the providers and fixers. When a partner expresses a need, asks for help, or presents a problem, a man might interpret this as an opportunity to demonstrate his worth, to prove his love through action and utility. He might see his capacity to be the rock, the reliable problem solver, as the ultimate expression of his affection. Consequently, he might prioritize practical solutions, tangible support, and being indispensable over emotional intimacy, deep conversations, or overt expressions of affection. He might believe that if his partner needs him, if she relies on him for practical support, financial stability, or physical protection, then she must, by extension, love him. The act of being needed provides a clear, measurable metric for his value, a concrete demonstration of his contribution to the relationship. However, this conflation often leads to a profound disconnect. While being needed is certainly a component of a healthy relationship, it is not synonymous with being loved in its entirety. Love encompasses emotional connection, empathy, shared vulnerability, mutual respect, and a deep understanding of each other's inner worlds. A partner might need a man for practical reasons, but still feel emotionally distant or unfulfilled if those deeper emotional needs are not met. The man, in turn, might feel confused and hurt if his partner expresses dissatisfaction or a desire for more emotional connection, because from his perspective, he has been consistently demonstrating his love by being there and doing things. He might not understand why his efforts to be useful are not being received as expressions of profound love. This psychological entanglement can lead to a relationship built on utility rather than intimacy, where one partner feels indispensable but emotionally isolated, and the other feels loved but perhaps not fully seen or understood, creating a subtle but persistent void that can be challenging to bridge without a deeper understanding of these distinct emotional currencies. The internal complexities of the male psyche, particularly their coping mechanisms, often manifest in ways that are easily misinterpreted by others, leading us to our seventh disturbing fact: men distance themselves when overwhelmed, not when disinterested. This is a crucial distinction that is frequently misunderstood in relationships. When a man is facing significant stress, emotional turmoil, or an abundance of problems, whether from work, family, or internal struggles, his default coping mechanism is often to withdraw. This isn't a sign that he has lost interest in his partner or the relationship. Rather, it's a deeply ingrained self-preservation response. For many men, the instinct when overwhelmed is to withdraw into their own minds, to process the information, to find a solution, or simply to create mental space away from the perceived pressure. Unlike some women who might instinctively seek connection, conversation, and emotional sharing when stressed, many men find solace in solitude and internal reflection. They might feel a need to go into their cave, metaphorically speaking, to wrestle with their demons alone, believing that exposing their distress or vulnerability would only add to the burden or make them appear weak. They might also feel a profound sense of responsibility to fix the problem themselves, and therefore see external communication as a distraction from that task. During these periods of withdrawal, a man might become quieter, less communicative, less affectionate, and seemingly more distant. His partner, observing this behavior, might understandably interpret it as a sign of disinterest, a waning of affection, or even a prelude to abandonment. This misinterpretation can lead to anxiety, insecurity, and attempts to pull the man back, which paradoxically can cause him to withdraw even further, feeling pressured and misunderstood. What he needs in that moment is often space, trust, and the assurance that his partner understands his need for temporary solitude, rather than an immediate demand for emotional engagement. He might return, having processed or compartmentalized his stress, ready to reconnect, only to find a relationship strained by the misunderstanding of his temporary retreat. This pattern highlights the profound difference in coping styles and the critical need for partners to understand that a man's temporary emotional distance is often a sign of his internal struggle, not a rejection of their connection. This tendency to withdraw when overwhelmed, coupled with the stoic facade men are expected to maintain, often masks a profound and universal human fear, bringing us to our 8th disturbing fact. Men fear abandonment, but don't show it openly. Beneath the veneer of independence, self-reliance, and emotional resilience that society often demands of them, many men harbor a deep-seated anxiety about being left alone, about losing significant relationships, and about the profound isolation that abandonment entails. This fear is not unique to men, of course, but their specific conditioning often dictates that this vulnerability must be kept strictly private, hidden from public view, and even from their closest loved ones. To openly express a fear of abandonment would be to admit a dependency, a need for connection, that might be perceived as unmanly or weak. It would contradict the image of the autonomous, self-sufficient man who stands strong on his own 2 feet. Consequently, this fear manifests in subtle, often indirect ways. A man might become overly possessive, not out of malice, but out of an unspoken terror of losing his partner. He might become excessively accommodating, trying to anticipate and fulfill every need, hoping that by making himself indispensable, he can prevent his partner from leaving. He might avoid deep emotional intimacy, paradoxically, because the deeper the connection, the greater the potential pain of loss, and the more profound the fear of abandonment becomes. He might also project an air of nonchalance or indifference even when internally gripped by anxiety about the stability of a relationship. When a partner threatens to leave or expresses dissatisfaction, a man might react with anger, withdrawal, or even a sudden, unexpected emotional shutdown, all of which can be defensive responses to the overwhelming fear of being alone. His outward reaction might seem disproportionate or confusing, but it's often a desperate attempt to regain control or to mask the intense internal pain triggered by the perceived threat of abandonment. This unspoken fear is a heavy burden, shaping behaviors and dynamics in relationships in ways that are often understood, leaving men silently grappling with an acute vulnerability they feel compelled to conceal, even from those they love most deeply. The intricate interplay of societal expectations and internal needs brings us to our 9th disturbing fact. Men crave appreciation more than affection. While affection, in its various forms, is certainly valued and desired by men, the psychological landscape often prioritizes recognition and respect for their efforts and contributions. This isn't to say that physical intimacy or verbal expressions of love are unimportant. Rather, it suggests that for many men, a profound sense of being seen, valued, and acknowledged for what they do, for the sacrifices they make, and for the role they play, resonates on a deeper, more fundamental level. This craving for appreciation is deeply rooted in the traditional masculine role of provider and protector. From a young age, boys are often taught that their worth is tied to their achievements, their ability to solve problems, and their capacity to provide. When a man works hard, whether at his job, around the house, or in supporting his family, a simple thank you, a genuine acknowledgement of his effort, or an expression of gratitude for his contributions can be incredibly validating. It affirms his sense of purpose and competence, reinforcing his belief that he is making a meaningful difference. Conversely, a lack of appreciation, or worse, a feeling of being taken for granted, can be deeply demoralizing. It can lead to feelings of resentment, demotivation, and a sense that his efforts are invisible or unvalued. He might interpret a lack of appreciation as a sign that he is not truly respected, or that his contributions are not significant, which can be profoundly damaging to his self-esteem and his sense of belonging in the relationship. While a hug or an "I love you" are certainly cherished, a heartfelt "I really appreciate how hard you work for us," or "Thank you for fixing that, you're so capable," can resonate with a different kind of power, touching upon his core identity and his need to feel useful and effective. This distinction is crucial for partners to understand. While overt affection is important, consistently showing genuine appreciation for a man's efforts, big or small, can be a powerful and often overlooked pathway to his heart, fulfilling a deep psychological need that often goes unspoken. The silent craving for appreciation makes men particularly susceptible to its inverse, leading us to our 10th disturbing fact. Criticism from a partner affects men deeper than they admit. While men might project an image of resilience and emotional toughness, an unvarnished critique from a romantic partner can strike at the very core of their self-worth, often far more profoundly than they let on. This is especially true when the criticism touches upon their competence, their ability to provide, their masculinity, or their fundamental character. For many men, their identity is intricately tied to their perceived effectiveness and their ability to be good enough in their roles. When a partner, someone whose opinion they deeply value and whose acceptance they crave, voices criticism, it can feel like a direct assault on their core being. It's not just about the words themselves, it's about the implicit message they perceive. You are failing. You are not meeting my expectations. You are not enough. This can trigger deep-seated insecurities and fears of inadequacy, echoing back to earlier experiences of not measuring up. The male response to criticism is often not overt emotional display. Instead, it might manifest as withdrawal, defensiveness, anger, or a sudden emotional shutdown. He might intellectualize the criticism, dismiss it, or even counterattack, not because he is unfeeling, but because the emotional impact is so overwhelming that these defensive mechanisms kick in to protect his fragile ego. Internally, however, the words can fester, leading to rumination, self-doubt, and a diminished sense of self-worth. He might spend hours, days, or even weeks replaying the criticism in his mind, feeling wounded and misunderstood, even while outwardly presenting a stoic or indifferent facade. This deep impact is often compounded by the fact that men are less likely to openly discuss their hurt or vulnerability, meaning the wound remains unacknowledged and untreated. The criticism, therefore, doesn't just pass over him. It often lands with significant force, leaving a lasting imprint on his psyche, quietly eroding his confidence and his sense of security in the relationship, all while he struggles to maintain an outward appearance of being unfazed. Given the difficulty men have in articulating emotions and their deep sensitivity to criticism, it's logical that they seek alternative outlets for their internal states, bringing us to our 11th disturbing fact. Men often process emotions physically through workouts, anger, or withdrawal. Lacking the culturally sanctioned language or comfort with verbal emotional expression, many men channel their intense feelings into physical actions or reactions. When stress, frustration, or sadness becomes overwhelming, a trip to the gym, a long run, or engaging in strenuous physical activity can serve as a powerful form of emotional catharsis. The physical exertion releases pent-up energy, provides a distraction, and can induce a physiological state that mimics a sense of control or accomplishment, temporarily alleviating emotional distress. It's a way to work through feelings without having to articulate them, allowing the body to bear the burden that the mind struggles to process verbally. Anger, as discussed earlier, is often one of the few acceptable emotions for men, and therefore it becomes a default outlet for a wide range of underlying feelings. Frustration, hurt, fear, or inadequacy, when unacknowledged or unexpressed, can easily morph into irritation, resentment, or explosive anger. This anger might be directed at others, at inanimate objects, or even internalized as self-criticism, serving as a destructive but familiar release valve for bottled-up emotions. Withdrawal, as we've also touched upon, is another common physical manifestation of emotional processing. When overwhelmed, a man might physically remove himself from a situation, retreat into solitude, or simply become quiet and disengaged. This physical distance creates mental space, allowing him to internally compartmentalize, strategize, or simply numb himself to the intensity of his feelings, all without engaging in the perceived vulnerability of verbal emotional processing. These physical outlets, while sometimes providing temporary relief, do not always lead to genuine emotional resolution. They can be adaptive coping mechanisms, but they can also prevent deeper introspection and the development of healthier, more direct emotional communication skills, leaving the underlying issues unaddressed and perpetuating a cycle of physical expression in lieu of authentic emotional engagement. The complex and often contradictory nature of male emotional processing leads us to a particularly nuanced and disturbing fact. Men can be emotionally faithful even when physically unfaithful. This isn't an attempt to justify infidelity, but rather an exploration of the psychological disconnect that can exist for some men between physical acts and emotional allegiance. For a certain subset of men, a physical encounter outside of a primary relationship might be compartmentalized as just that, a physical act devoid of significant emotional attachment or romantic investment. The primary emotional bond, the deep sense of connection, loyalty, and love, might remain firmly rooted with their long-term partner. This phenomenon can be deeply perplexing and hurtful to the betrayed partner, who often sees physical fidelity as an absolute cornerstone of emotional fidelity. However, for the man experiencing this internal split, the physical act might be driven by a multitude of factors that he perceives as separate from his core emotional commitment: a search for novelty, a momentary lapse in judgment, an attempt to fulfill unacknowledged physical desires, a coping mechanism for stress, or even a misguided effort to feel desirable or competent. He might genuinely believe that the physical act does not diminish his love, respect, or emotional dedication to his primary partner. He might not experience the same emotional entanglement with the third party that his partner would assume. In his mind, his heart and his true emotional loyalty remain with his primary relationship, while the physical act is relegated to a separate, less significant sphere. This psychological compartmentalization allows him to maintain a sense of emotional faithfulness, even as his actions contradict conventional definitions of fidelity. It highlights a profound and often disturbing disjunction between physical behavior and emotional experience, showcasing how men, conditioned to separate emotion from action, can rationalize and experience their relationships in ways that are deeply confusing and painful for those who operate under a more integrated understanding of loyalty and commitment. This tendency to compartmentalize and rationalize extends beyond infidelity, profoundly influencing how men deal with emotional pain, bringing us to our 13th disturbing fact: men rationalize heartbreak instead of feeling it. When confronted with the profound emotional pain of a breakup, a significant loss, or a deep disappointment in love, many men instinctively retreat into an intellectual framework rather than allowing themselves to fully experience the raw, visceral agony of heartbreak. This isn't a conscious choice to be cold or uncaring. It's often a deeply ingrained coping mechanism, a defense against the overwhelming vulnerability that comes with true emotional pain. Society has conditioned men to be logical, stoic, and problem solvers, and feeling deep, unmanageable pain can feel antithetical to this identity. Instead of weeping, grieving, or openly expressing their sorrow, a man might immediately try to find reasons, justifications, or logical explanations for the heartbreak. He might dissect the relationship, analyze what went wrong, blame himself or his partner, or intellectualize the entire experience as a learning lesson. He might focus on practicalities, such as dividing assets, finding a new place to live, or immediately throwing himself into work or new distractions, all as a way to avoid sitting with the uncomfortable, disorganizing feelings of grief and loss. The pain is there, undoubtedly, but it is often filtered through a cognitive lens, stripped of its emotional intensity and reframed into something manageable rather than something that simply is. This rationalization serves as a protective barrier, preventing the floodgates of emotion. However, while it might offer temporary relief from the immediate sting, it often delays or prevents genuine emotional processing. The unacknowledged grief, the unfelt pain, doesn't simply disappear. It can fester beneath the surface, manifesting as cynicism, difficulty forming new attachments, anger, or a general emotional numbness. The man might appear to get over it quickly, moving on with an outward air of composure, but internally the wound remains, unhealed, because he never allowed himself the crucial, painful, but ultimately necessary process of truly feeling and acknowledging the heartbreak. The struggle with feeling and expressing emotions, especially those deemed vulnerable, is a direct consequence of deeply embedded societal expectations, leading us to our 14th disturbing fact. Men struggle with vulnerability because they were taught to be the rock. From a young age, boys are often implicitly and explicitly assigned the role of the unwavering pillar of strength, the protector, the provider, the one who remains steady and unflappable in the face of adversity. The metaphor of the rock is powerful and pervasive, implying solidness, resilience, and an unyielding nature. To be the rock means to absorb pressure without cracking, to offer support without needing it, and to remain emotionally impervious, especially when others are fragile. To deviate from this role, to admit fear, uncertainty, sadness, or a need for help, is often perceived as a profound failure, a betrayal of their masculine identity. The very act of being vulnerable, of revealing one's inner turmoil, one's doubts, one's fears, is seen as antithetical to the strength and stability they are expected to embody. They learn that their value often lies in their capacity to be strong for others, and that showing weakness might undermine their ability to fulfill this crucial role. This conditioning creates an immense internal conflict. The natural human need for connection, empathy, and emotional sharing clashes with the ingrained imperative to remain stoic and self-sufficient. Consequently, many men develop elaborate defenses against vulnerability. They might deflect with humor, withdraw into silence, or intellectualize their emotions, all to avoid the terrifying prospect of exposing their inner fragility. The fear isn't just about being judged, it's about losing their perceived utility, their respect, and their very identity as the rock. This struggle is a profound burden, forcing men to carry their emotional weight in isolation, preventing them from forming truly deep, authentic connections, and ultimately hindering their own emotional growth and well-being, all because they are trapped in a role that denies their fundamental humanity. 18. Sunk cost fallacy check. The sunk cost fallacy is the tendency to continue investing resources, time, money, effort into a project or decision simply because you've already invested heavily in it, even if continuing is irrational and leads to further losses. The resources you've already spent are sunk costs. They cannot be recovered regardless of your future actions. Rational decision-making should only consider future costs and benefits, not past ones. This model is powerful because it helps you make forward-looking, rational decisions free from the emotional pull of past investments. Humans are wired to avoid waste, and abandoning something after significant investment feels like a waste, even if it's the most logical choice. This fallacy can lead to people staying in failing relationships, unprofitable businesses, or unfulfilling careers far longer than they should, simply because they've already put so much into it. To apply a sunk cost fallacy check, consciously separate past investments from future decisions. Ask, if I hadn't already invested anything, would I still make this decision today? Is continuing this course of action truly the best use of my resources going forward, regardless of what I've already spent? What are the future costs and future benefits, independent of the past? This helps you objectively assess the current situation and make choices based on what makes sense now, rather than being anchored to unrecoverable past expenses. By letting go of the emotional burden of sunk costs, you free yourself to cut your losses when necessary, pivot to more promising ventures, and allocate your resources more efficiently towards future success, preventing you from throwing good money or time or effort after bad. 19. Loss aversion awareness. Loss aversion is the psychological phenomenon where the pain of losing something is psychologically more powerful than the pleasure of gaining an equivalent amount. Simply put, people tend to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains. For example, the pain of losing $100 is typically felt more intensely than the joy of finding $100. This asymmetry in our emotional response significantly influences our decision-making. This model is powerful because it explains many seemingly irrational behaviors and helps you guard against its negative influence. Loss aversion can make us overly cautious, risk-averse when we should be taking calculated risks, or cause us to cling to suboptimal situations to avoid the perceived loss of change. It can explain why people hold on to losing investments too long, or why they are reluctant to try new things even when the potential upside is significant. To apply loss aversion awareness, recognize when your decisions might be unduly influenced by the fear of loss. Ask, am I making this choice to avoid a potential loss, even if it means missing out on a greater gain? Am I clinging to the status quo purely out of fear of losing what I currently have, rather than objectively evaluating better alternatives? What would a purely rational actor do in this situation, ignoring the emotional weight of potential loss? By consciously acknowledging this bias, you can reframe decisions, focusing on the potential gains and the opportunity costs of inaction rather than solely on the fear of loss. This allows for more balanced risk assessment, encourages bolder but calculated moves, and prevents you from being paralyzed by the exaggerated negative emotions associated with potential setbacks, leading to more optimal choices in the long run. 20. Systems thinking. Systems thinking is a holistic approach to understanding how individual parts of a system interact and influence each other to create a collective outcome. Instead of analyzing components in isolation, it focuses on the interconnections, feedback loops, and emergent properties of the entire system. It recognizes that the behavior of a system is often more than the sum of its parts, and that fixing individual problems without understanding the larger context can lead to unintended consequences. This model is powerful because it allows you to identify root causes, anticipate complex behaviors, and design more effective interventions. Most problems in life, from organizational inefficiencies to environmental challenges, are systemic. A simple example is traffic congestion. Widening a road, a first-order isolated solution, might temporarily ease traffic, but often induces more demand, leading to more congestion, a systemic second-order effect. To apply systems thinking, zoom out and consider the broader context. Ask, what are the different components of this system? How do they interact? What are the flows of information, resources, and influence between them? What feedback loops are at play? Where are the leverage points where a small change could have a large impact? This approach encourages you to look for patterns, dynamics, and relationships rather than just isolated events. By understanding the underlying structure that generates behavior, you can move beyond symptomatic fixes to address fundamental issues. It promotes a deeper understanding of complex phenomenon, from personal health to global economies, enabling more sustainable and impactful solutions by recognizing the interconnectedness of everything. 21. Bottleneck analysis. Building on systems thinking, bottleneck analysis focuses on identifying the specific constraint or choke point that limits the overall capacity or performance of a system. In any process, there's almost always one step that slows everything else down. This bottleneck dictates the maximum output of the entire system, much like the narrowest point in a pipe determines the maximum water flow. Improving any other part of the system that isn't the bottleneck will not significantly improve overall performance. For example, in a manufacturing plant, speeding up a non-bottleneck machine won't increase total production if another machine is still the slowest. In your personal life, if you want to write a book, the bottleneck might not be your writing speed, but your research time or your procrastination in starting. To apply bottleneck analysis, carefully map out the steps in a process or system. Identify where work piles up, where delays occur, or where resources are most strained. Ask, what is the single biggest constraint preventing me or this system from achieving more? What step takes the longest or has the lowest capacity? Once identified, focus your energy on alleviating that specific constraint. This might involve increasing its capacity, optimizing its workflow, or offloading some of its tasks. By systematically addressing bottlenecks, you unlock the full potential of your system, leading to significant and often rapid improvements in efficiency and output, ensuring your efforts are always targeted where they will make the most difference. The overarching theme of male psychological needs culminates in a fundamental truth, bringing us to our 18th disturbing fact: men's biggest emotional need is feeling respected. While love, affection, and connection are universally desired, for many men, respect forms the bedrock of their emotional well-being and their sense of self-worth within relationships and in the world. This isn't just about polite deference, it's about feeling truly valued, admired, and acknowledged for their capabilities, their contributions, their opinions, and their character. It's the feeling that their partner believes in them, trusts their judgment, and holds them in high regard. This need for respect is deeply intertwined with the traditional masculine role, where a man's worth was often measured by his ability to provide, protect, and lead. While modern roles are more fluid, the psychological imprint of this conditioning remains profound. When a man feels respected, it validates his efforts, affirms his identity, and fuels his confidence. It tells him that he is seen as competent, capable, and worthy. Conversely, a lack of respect, perceived disrespect, or constant criticism can be deeply damaging. It can erode his self-esteem, foster resentment, and lead to feelings of inadequacy and emotional withdrawal. If a man feels that his partner doesn't respect his decisions, dismisses his opinions, or constantly challenges his competence, it can be more painful and destabilizing than a lack of overt affection. He might interpret it as a fundamental questioning of his worth as a man, leading to a profound sense of emotional insecurity. This need for respect is often unspoken, but it underpins much of his behavior and his emotional responses within a relationship. It's a silent barometer of his satisfaction and security, a foundational requirement that, when met, allows him to feel secure enough to give and receive love more freely, but when absent, leaves him feeling profoundly unmoored and unvalued, regardless of other expressions of affection. The profound need for respect and the fear of judgment often lead to a common psychological defense mechanism, bringing us to our 19th disturbing fact: men often hide insecurities behind confidence. This isn't necessarily a conscious deception, but rather a deeply ingrained strategy to protect a fragile ego and maintain a desired social image. From a young age, men are often taught that confidence is a hallmark of masculinity, a sign of strength, competence, and leadership. To reveal insecurities, doubts, or fears would be to expose vulnerability, which, as we've explored, is often perceived as a weakness. Consequently, many men develop a carefully constructed facade of unwavering self-assurance, projecting an image of being in control, knowledgeable, and fearless, even when internally grappling with profound self-doubt. This outward display of confidence serves multiple purposes. It can deter potential criticism, command respect, and create an impression of capability that might even convince the man himself. He might overcompensate for his internal anxieties by being overly assertive, dismissive of others' opinions, or by taking on challenges that push him beyond his comfort zone, all to prove his worth both to himself and to others. The bravado can be a desperate attempt to drown out the internal critic, to project an image of strength that he hopes will eventually become his reality. However, this constant performance of confidence comes at a significant cost. It prevents genuine self-acceptance, hinders authentic connection, and creates an emotional wall between the man and those who might otherwise offer support and understanding. The fear is that if the facade crumbles, if his true insecurities are revealed, he will be judged, rejected, or seen as less than. This dynamic creates a lonely existence, where the man is constantly performing, unable to truly relax and be himself, forever trapped in the exhausting cycle of maintaining an illusion of strength to conceal the very real vulnerabilities that lie beneath. This intricate dance of hiding insecurities behind confidence often stems from a deeper, more painful internal conviction, leading us to our 20th disturbing fact. Men often feel unlovable but pretend otherwise. Despite outward displays of strength, confidence, or even arrogance, a significant number of men grapple with a profound, often unspoken, sense of being fundamentally unworthy of love. This feeling can stem from a myriad of sources: childhood experiences of conditional affection, perceived failures, societal pressures to achieve impossible ideals, or a lack of genuine emotional validation throughout their lives. The societal narrative that often judges men by their performance, their achievements, and their material success can inadvertently create a belief that their inherent worth is contingent upon these external factors. If they fall short, they internalize the message that they are inadequate, and by extension, unlovable. This deep-seated insecurity is incredibly painful and terrifying, so much so that it is fiercely guarded and rarely, if ever, openly admitted. Instead, it manifests as a desperate need for external validation, an intense drive to succeed, an avoidance of intimacy, or a tendency to sabotage relationships when they get too close. The pretense of being lovable, of being desirable and confident, is a protective mechanism, a shield against the crushing weight of their internal conviction. They might engage in behaviors designed to elicit love or admiration, but when it is offered, they might struggle to truly accept it, filtering it through their lens of unworthiness. They might push away affection, question compliments, or create distance, not because they don't want love, but because they struggle to believe they deserve it. This internal conflict is a silent battle, a constant effort to reconcile the desire for connection with the pervasive fear of being truly seen and found wanting. The pretense is exhausting, creating a profound sense of emotional isolation as they navigate relationships with a heavy heart, constantly fearing that their deepest, most painful secret, that they are unlovable, will eventually be discovered, leading to the ultimate rejection they dread. The deep-seated need for respect and the hidden fear of being unlovable make men acutely sensitive to subtle cues. Bringing us to our 21st disturbing fact: men are more affected by their partner's tone than the words. While the literal content of what is said is important, the emotional delivery, the inflection, volume, cadence, and underlying emotional charge often carries far greater weight for men, particularly in intimate relationships. This isn't merely about sensitivity, it's about how men are wired to interpret communication within a context where direct emotional expression is often suppressed or unclear. When a partner speaks with a harsh, dismissive, contemptuous, or exasperated tone, even if the words themselves are relatively innocuous, the underlying message of disrespect, frustration, or disapproval can be deeply wounding. For a man who craves respect and fears being unlovable, a negative tone can trigger an immediate defensive response, signaling a perceived threat to his standing, his worth, or the stability of the relationship. He might shut down, withdraw, or become defensive, not because he is ignoring the words, but because the tone has already conveyed a powerful nonverbal message that bypasses his logical processing and directly hits his emotional core. He might hear, "You're incompetent," or "I don't respect you," in the tone, even if the actual words are, "Could you please take out the trash?" Conversely, a soft, understanding, or affectionate tone can convey reassurance, love, and respect, even when delivering difficult news or expressing a complaint. The tone acts as an emotional filter, shaping how the words are received and interpreted. This heightened sensitivity to tone can lead to misunderstandings, as a man might react strongly to what he perceives as a harsh delivery, while his partner might be baffled by his reaction, believing she was only stating a fact. It underscores the critical importance of how things are said, revealing a deep vulnerability in men that is often overlooked, where the subtle nuances of vocal expression can profoundly impact their emotional state and their perception of the relationship's health, often far more than the explicit verbal content. The interplay of hidden insecurities, the fear of being unlovable, and the craving for respect culminates in a particularly acute anxiety, leading us to our 22nd disturbing fact: men fear being emotionally replaced more than physically replaced. While the thought of a partner being physically unfaithful is certainly painful and a violation of trust, for many men, the deeper, more existential dread lies in the possibility of being emotionally supplanted, of another man fulfilling the emotional needs that they themselves are meant to provide, or perhaps more accurately, the emotional needs they struggle to provide. This fear strikes at the core of their perceived utility, their unique value, and their role as a partner. If a man feels that another individual is offering his partner a deeper emotional connection, a greater sense of understanding, or a more profound emotional intimacy than he can, it can be profoundly destabilizing. It challenges his identity as the primary emotional anchor, the confidant, the one who truly gets his partner. This isn't just about jealousy, it's about the fear of becoming irrelevant, of being deemed emotionally inadequate, and of losing the unique, irreplaceable bond he believes he shares. The physical act, while hurtful, can sometimes be rationalized or compartmentalized as a momentary lapse, a physical desire separate from true emotional commitment. But the idea of his partner finding genuine emotional solace, understanding, and connection with someone else can feel like a far more fundamental betrayal, a direct assault on his emotional purpose and his sense of being irreplaceable. This fear is often unspoken, hidden beneath layers of stoicism or defensiveness, but it can drive behaviors such as possessiveness, a subtle insecurity when his partner connects deeply with other men, or an exaggerated effort to be the strong one to ensure his emotional indispensability. It highlights a profound vulnerability in men, revealing that beyond the physical realm, the ultimate threat to their sense of self and their place in a relationship is the fear of being emotionally superseded, leaving them feeling profoundly unneeded and ultimately unloved. The pervasive fear of inadequacy, fueled by the pressure to be the rock and the underlying feeling of being unlovable, often manifests in self-destructive ways, bringing us to our 23rd disturbing fact: men often sabotage relationships when they feel inadequate. This isn't a deliberate, malicious act, but rather a deeply unconscious and painful defense mechanism. When a man feels overwhelmed by a sense of not being good enough, whether it's in his ability to provide, to be emotionally present, to satisfy his partner, or to meet the perceived demands of the relationship, the internal pressure can become unbearable. Instead of confronting these feelings of inadequacy, which would require immense vulnerability, he might unconsciously create distance, provoke arguments, or engage in behaviors that push his partner away. The logic, however twisted, is often, if I push them away first, I control the narrative. If they leave because of my actions, it's my choice, not because I was found wanting. Or, if I'm already messing things up, then when they eventually leave, it won't be as surprising or painful. This self-sabotage can manifest in various ways, becoming emotionally distant, picking fights over trivial matters, neglecting the relationship, engaging in risky behaviors, or even withdrawing affection. He might unconsciously test his partner's love and patience, pushing boundaries to see how much she will tolerate, almost as if seeking validation that she truly loves him despite his perceived flaws, or conversely, confirming his deepest fear that he is indeed unlovable and will eventually be abandoned. This behavior is deeply paradoxical. The man who craves connection and fears abandonment ends up creating the very outcome he dreads, all because the internal pain of feeling inadequate is so profound that he cannot bear to face it directly. The act of sabotaging becomes a twisted form of self-protection, a desperate attempt to regain a sense of control over an emotional situation where he feels utterly powerless, ultimately leading to the destruction of the very connection he secretly yearns for, leaving both him and his partner bewildered and heartbroken. The constant suppression of emotions, exacerbated by feelings of inadequacy and the fear of judgment, inevitably leads to a buildup of internal pressure, bringing us to our 24th disturbing fact. Men bottle up emotions until they explode in anger. This phenomenon is a direct consequence of the conditioning that discourages male emotional expression, particularly of softer or vulnerable feelings. From an early age, men are taught that anger is the only acceptable, or at least the most understandable, outlet for intense emotional distress. Sadness, fear, hurt, frustration, and anxiety are all pushed down, compartmentalized, and denied conscious expression. The man becomes an emotional pressure cooker, accumulating layer upon layer of unaddressed feelings. Each perceived slight, each disappointment, each moment of stress, each unfulfilled need adds to the internal reservoir of suppressed emotion. He might intellectually rationalize these feelings away, distract himself with work or hobbies, or simply ignore the subtle cues his body and mind are sending. However, emotions do not simply disappear. They accumulate, gaining intensity beneath the surface. Eventually, a seemingly minor trigger, a misplaced item, a casual comment, a small inconvenience, can act as the final straw, causing the entire pent-up emotional reservoir to erupt in an explosive burst of anger. This anger often appears disproportionate to the immediate trigger, leaving those around him bewildered and hurt, and often leaving the man himself feeling guilty, ashamed, and confused by his own reaction. He might not even understand what truly caused the outburst, as the underlying emotional tapestry is so complex and deeply buried. This pattern is incredibly damaging to relationships, as it creates an unpredictable and frightening environment, and it is equally damaging to the man, as it prevents him from developing healthier emotional regulation skills and from truly understanding and addressing the root causes of his distress. The explosion of anger is not the emotion itself, but the desperate, unskillful, and ultimately destructive release of a multitude of emotions that have been denied their rightful expression. A tragic testament to the cost of emotional suppression. Finally, the pervasive societal expectation for men to be strong, capable, and in control extends to the emotional realm, leading us to our 25th and final disturbing fact. Men often feel responsible for fixing everything, including emotions. This deep-seated sense of responsibility is rooted in the traditional masculine role of problem solver, protector, and provider. From fixing a broken appliance to mending a strained relationship, men are often conditioned to believe that their value lies in their ability to identify problems and implement solutions. This extends even to the complex, often unfixable, landscape of human emotions. When a partner or a loved one expresses distress, sadness, or frustration, a man's immediate instinct is often to jump into fix-it mode. He might offer practical advice, try to logically dismantle the problem, or suggest immediate solutions, believing that this is the most helpful and loving response. He might struggle to simply listen, empathize, and validate emotions because his internal programming tells him that emotions are problems to be solved, not experiences to be shared and processed. This fix-it mentality applies not only to the emotions of others, but also to his own. When he experiences emotional discomfort, his inclination is to find a way to make it disappear, to fix himself, rather than to sit with the feeling, understand its origins, or allow himself to be vulnerable. The burden of this responsibility is immense. It creates an unrealistic expectation that he must always have the answers, always be capable of restoring equilibrium, and always be the strong one who can mend what is broken, including the most intricate and often unmanageable aspects of human emotional experience. This constant pressure to fix everything, including the unfixable, leaves men feeling perpetually inadequate, exhausted, and isolated as they silently carry the weight of the world's emotional burdens, believing it is their sole responsibility to mend them, even when all that is truly needed is a listening ear and a shared moment of human connection. These 25 facts paint a complex, often poignant picture of male psychology. They reveal the profound impact of societal expectations, the silent battles fought within, and the deep emotional needs that often go unexpressed and unmet. Understanding these disturbing truths is not about judgment, but about fostering empathy, encouraging deeper communication, and ultimately creating a world where men are afforded the same emotional freedom and support that all humans deserve. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the hidden depths of the male psyche.